Good evening. My name is Christopher Balzano, and Natalie's not here with me tonight. But welcome to TOL Tripping on Legends Live. I'm first going to start out with an apology of sorts. I'm going to do the best that I can with this. I should probably tell you that I am using my daughter's laptop. I am without a laptop. So I cannot, beyond all, say that I can 100% say that this is going to last the entire time. Her connection is completely messed up. She's got like the worst little Chromebook of all time. Great for writing, kind of, for her, not for me. Not so hot with this. But welcome to TOL Live. I'm Christopher Balzano, and we are talking tonight about haunted schools. And part of this is inspired by two things. So I'm glad I've got at least one person in here. But this is inspired by our upcoming trip to Stetson. So if you haven't yet looked at or listened to episode 41 of Tripping on Legends, we talk about all these different things that we're going to be doing in DeLand. And one of the things we talk about is visiting Stetson University, which has a really great, it's a university down here in Florida. It's got some really great lore attached to it, and the people there have been absolutely amazing. The other, and this might be more relevant, I'm trying to get that glare, but that's the only light I have in that area. Makes me look angelic, though. The other reason why I'm doing this is that I am, in some ways, celebrating the 10-year reunion of the first graduating class of Notre Dame High School. So if you are in or from Notre Dame High School, whether you're part of that first initial class, I see Hans is here, or you're just kind of one of the other classes, feel free to pipe in. But I'm extremely proud of that first graduating class. They were juniors, I believe, when I got there. I had them for computer class. Believe it or not, I was a computer teacher. It was a crazy experience. But I want to start out with a nice job, Hans. I want to start off with a story about them, having to do with the ghosts, and it completely fits in with this whole idea of what is or why we need these paranormal stories in schools. So for those of you guys who don't know what Notre Dame is, they were a school that was built or kind of reborn on the site of what was another school. That school had closed down. They went in, Cristo Rey came in, and they decided to start this school. And it's been a highly successful school for 14 years. And Sarah Cohen and I, if you guys remember Sarah Cohen, decided that what the school needed was a ghost. Like it needed some kind of ghostly legend. It had I'm blanking on what do you call a female monastery right now, but it had the nuns were attached to it. It was very, very old building, kind of broken down a little bit when we first initially got there. And Sarah and I talked about how to bring these kids together. We felt like we needed to give them a haunting, right? Because all great schools have a haunting. And so we invented this entire story about a ghost named Maria. And Maria used to go and visit the nuns and on the weekends and to get away from her family. And her hair, she went there one weekend, they were all in retreat. She went up on the roof and because of the slick rain, got caught. She tripped, slipped, her hair got caught in the spikes, and she essentially hung herself. And she was screaming for an hour as she was choking herself out, and no one would come to help her. No one did anything. And now her ghost haunts the school, right? So pretty crazy. And we made a few stories up about people who had experienced things, stuff like that. And we thought it was a pretty cool idea, right? The idea was we wanted them to feel as if this was their house. We wanted them to feel unified by some kind of ghost story. Now, the crazy thing about Maria is Oddly enough, it was a Catholic school, but the nuns allowed me to teach a ghost hunting class, and I had to call it a ghost hunting class, or else kids wouldn't do it. But it was a investigating class, and I taught them how to use equipment. I taught them the right way to go about things, and we actually captured the ghost of Maria on tape. Maria was talking to us in Spanish. She was saying things like, "Help me," and the crazy thing was, we got the trifecta, right? We got this amazing EVP. At the same exact time, we caught a picture of something odd on the door, like a face at the door, and there was all this equipment spike. Now, those of you guys who know me now know I'm not much for evidence, but when you get three things like that converging, now, was this a ghost that was already there? Did we actually create it just because of our need for it? Remains. But the fact of the matter is, there is now, I don't know if it still is, I don't know anyone who goes to Notre Dame now or even went there afterwards. Now, a strange thing is there was a Spanish teacher who was there who then, after we did all that, started hearing weird things when he would work late at night. One student I remember, I can't remember who it was, told me that they saw a student they didn't recognize walking through the halls one day that matched Maria's spirit. Of course, don't necessarily know if I can believe that student, but that's the whole point of this, right? Schools are an amazing place for there to be ghosts. We need them there. We have to, and I'm here in Florida, and I'm in Fort Myers, Florida, and there are like 3 different colleges that are all pretty much brand new. They don't have that mystique yet. They don't have that tradition yet. And that's what these ghosts haunt. That's what these ghosts point at. This need for tradition, this need for something to be passed down from generation to generation to generation. Nowhere on the planet, except for in schools and in universities especially, do you have this level of stress, this level of need to connect to people. Now, I know individuals will say, I didn't really care about connecting to people when I was in school. You know, I was my own person. But the fact of the matter is, when you have people that are gathered together for a common reason, and this common reason in this case is to get an education, whether they want to or not, they need things to act as kind of stakes in the ground, as we always say, flags in the ground. They need things to act as touchstones. They need to be able to talk about stuff when they can't talk about anything else. If you followed what I was doing this afternoon, when I posted the event, I posted a picture of Charlesgate. And Charlesgate really is what got me started in the paranormal, because it is one of the most haunted buildings in Boston. And we would get all of these strange things. I mean, there's more legends that are attached to, thank you, Natalie. There are more legends that are attached to the things that are going on there than maybe any building in Boston. There was the ghost of horses in the basement who had died. There was a ghost of a girl in an elevator who had, for some reason, she had died. Now, the cool thing about Charlesgate is it was so old, and I don't have the exact dates in front of me, but you can check out the website to get some of these stories. It was so old that it had initially been built, I think in the 1920s, as a hotel for the mafia. Now that's automatically your legend alarm should go off on that, right? And they built it in such a way, and this is actually kind of true, that you can only see the 6th floor of the building from one angle, which is kind of crazy that it was designed that way, but it's a beautiful building if you've seen the pictures. The mafia was said to have committed their crimes there, right, on the 6th floor. Now, why they would take people up to the top of this floor of something to do what they needed to do, I'm not quite sure, but those were the stories, and so there were those ghosts there as well. And of course, not only did it have this kind of troubled origin story, but it had all of these people who had owned the building over the next 80 years, or however long it was. And so people were constantly kind of coming in and out. It was a residence hall for Boston University. It was a Fleabag motel. It was a Emerson dorm, right? And of course, Emerson, if you know anything about it, is kind of sketchy to begin with, in terms of you have a lot of students there who are into the occult. You have a lot of students there who are into things that maybe some people would consider fringe. And so, you know, there were plenty of people who practice Wicca, plenty of these people who are bringing this kind of energy and not afraid to dabble into the occult. So it was one of those things where it was the perfect setting. It was the perfect kind of storm of all these things: history, creepy things that were going on. An old building. One of the things that we discovered when we were living there is that there were rooms that were in the blueprints that weren't necessarily dorm rooms. And so we kept finding all these kind of hidden rooms where we would do things that we weren't supposed to do and not get caught. Rob, great to see you too, man. I've been thinking about you over the last couple of days. We got to connect, actually. And these stories started to multiply while I was there. And I was there the last 2 years. It was an Emerson dorm. And what happened was I kept hearing all these stories of stuff that would happen, but why it would happen was stuff I'd already heard before. Wait a minute, that story sounds familiar. And so that's kind of where my original idea for the Crossroads began, was this idea of all these stories going on. There was a great story of, which I assume every college dorm especially has, which is the suicide. And one of the students had committed suicide. Her roommate didn't help her when she was supposed to, and so now that ghost is in that room. And of course, after she died, she tortured the roommate, and so the roommate went crazy and had to leave, and since then no one's been able to live in that room. And of course, no one could really identify what room it was, but everyone told that story, right? And everyone would tell the story about there was an old woman living there who, once again, no one knew the room, no one knew when exactly this had happened, but there was an old woman living there. Now, this story is repeated in dorms all across America. And she had, for some reason, been able to rent it. Now, in our case, it was an easy story because it used to be a tenement hall, right? And she had lifetime rent. She wasn't allowed, she couldn't get kicked out as long as she paid her money. And she used to go out in the middle of the night to go shopping. And now here's one of the things that's very, very familiar. She would smoke incessantly. And so at times people would see her going in and out. People would smell that horrible, horrible smoke. Now, that's not true, right? This is kind of cool because this is a legend on top of a legend. So the story goes that because she was there and no one ever bothered to check up on her because, they kind of even want her out of there, she died. And she was in there for months before anyone realized that she was dead, and she was taken out. Once again, now she haunts the place. Same kind of thing. In the middle of the night, her door is slamming. That smell of smoke, the smell of her decomposing body. I started to see that all these stories were ones that I had heard in other places, and so I wanted to explore that. And that's kind of how not Tripping on Legends, I should say, but Massachusetts Paranormal Crossroads began. We need that. College, high school, other schools, they need that kind of connection. They need that story that the seniors tell the freshmen. They need that initiation. As a matter of fact, once again, now we're talking about Stetson. When I talked to the archivist at Stetson, she said, yeah, here's this woman. She's retired now, but she used to be an archivist here. And she used to, as part of the initial tour, this one would come in and she would tell the whole things about all of the ghost stories. I found the same exact thing when I went to Dave, you drive to Charlesgate? Is that what you're talking about? When I was doing research for Stonehill College. Stonehill College, if you have not read Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle, first of all, why haven't you read Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle? It's a pretty good book. But if you haven't read it, taking a drink, I talk about the hauntings at Stonehill College, right? And one of these hauntings is supposed to be of a little girl who is the daughter of the first president of the college, and she died in the swimming pool. And the swimming pool then had to be paved and boarded up, and they will never have a swimming pool on campus again, right? So that's one of the classic. And this girl is said to, because it's a gym now, said to dribble the basketball, or you hear a little girl crying or screaming or splashes and all these kind of things. Went to Stonehill College, And actually, I went to Stonehill College because that was published. That story was published. All right, Rob, I will definitely call you. I don't know if I still have your number, but I'll message you to get it, okay? Dave, I will autograph your book anytime you want. That story was published in the Boston Globe. They interviewed me, and I gave them that story, and they Stonehill College wrote a response. They wrote a response to the Boston Globe. They CC'd me on it, tearing me apart, saying that these are not real stories, da 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 da. So the investigator part of me obviously was very offended by that. The folklorist part of me went and met with them. So I met with the librarian. The best part is I don't know if it's still this way, but up to that point, every president of Stonehill College has been a Catholic priest. So there's no way that they could have been a daughter of a president who died in the swimming pool, right? But people told that story all the time. And it was one of those things where, and here's where I'm getting back around to the story. I talked to someone who ran that ghost tour, and he said he found it 100% necessary to tell those stories. He said he would take the freshmen out, he would show them the grounds, he would tell them the stories, and then, how you doing, Colvin? And then he would report back to them, when they were sophomores and juniors and seniors. And what they said was that helped them remember their freshman year. It helped them connect because people were freaked out, people were scary, people were trying to find someone to talk to. It's the same reason why people get involved in sports. It's the same college sports, becoming rooters of their team, not necessarily playing. We need that connection to people, but also there's a lot of fear that's going on, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the fear. Some of the best urban legends take place in college. I would love to now do a shout out now if there wasn't such a lull in the response time. What are some urban legends that you guys know that take place in college? I will give you a minute. I'm going to sip my coffee. I'm going to give a minute to respond. This is exciting stuff. Urban legends that take place in college. All right, good. Didn't get any response, so I'm going to keep going forward with it. Probably one of the most famous ones. And you'll notice almost all of these revolve around women, right? And so there's the girl who is deciding to stay back for the weekend. For some reason, everyone's going out. Usually it's like a break, like a Christmas break or Thanksgiving break usually makes more sense. And she decides to stay in, and her roommate is going to stay in too, but she's going to go to a party. The roommate goes to a party. The girl's all alone, just kind of enjoying, having no one around, not having to study. And she, of course, there's a report that there is some kind of maniac who's crazy and on campus and all this stuff like that. And since she hears the scratching or the knocking on the door, and it's like frantic, and someone's going in. So she locks herself in the closet and then she wakes up the next day and she comes out, and the whole time it's been her roommate scratching on the door because someone was trying to attack her. Someone had their hand around her throat so she couldn't speak, and she was scratching on the door, banging on the door, trying to get the roommate to answer. And so this girl's inability to respond to that caused her to die. Probably the most famous one is the Aren't You Glad You Didn't Turn on the Light, right? Which is the girl comes home once again, two females, which is hot if you think college, but moving on. Two females, and the second one comes in late, and she walks into the room, and she is assuming she's hearing her roommate having sex. And it's pretty wild. And so she decides to just walk. She walks in her bed. She puts her headphones on or whatever it is, or maybe sometimes, usually it's another room, and she goes to sleep. And she wakes up the next morning, and her roommate has been brutally murdered. And on the wall, written in the girl's blood, is, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?" And of course, it's got that great hook at the end. "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?" Turn on the light. In other words, the killer was there. The killer was active. If she had done anything, she would have attacked it. But it's this idea that these two women are living together and they are unsafe. Now, if you track back what the meaning of those two and all these kind of college legends that are like that, urban legends that are like that, and I know I'm going for the spooky one, of course. There's the if your roommate commits suicide, you get a 4.0. And of course, there's a story of the person who did the blue books, and they answered one, and then they put it down so it looked like they'd answered the whole question, and the professor thought he lost it, so he gave him an automatic A. They're those kind of ones. I'm talking about the spooky ones, because who cares about the not spooky ones, right? Yeah. All right, Colvin says that there's a ghost that pushed the ball right into the 91 Miami versus FSU game. I believe that same ghost is the one that pulled the flag on the Ohio State Miami game in, what was that, 2000, 99? Because, there was no penalty. In terms of these spooky ones, so many of them revolve around sex, which is good. So many of them revolve around, and this is probably more important, women going away for the first time. These urban legends have their origin in this idea that for the first time, women were going off to college en masse too soon, 2002, okay. And they were not safe. They shouldn't be there. And these urban legends are set up almost to say the women who deserve to die, that they were someplace where they shouldn't be, and therefore they were murdered. If they had only been home, it's kind of like a Woody Woodpecker thing. If Woody had only gone to the police, none of this would have happened. If they had only stayed home in their house or went and got married, there's no way that they would have had this brutal murder. By the way, there's an invasion of flies still in my house. So if you see those things, they are not ghosts or orbs. They are these flies that are gone crazy in all of Cape Coral. The same idea extends to, I think, a lot of these college hauntings. There's a certain level of anxiety. There's a certain level of fear. There's a certain level of this idea that you are alone for the first time. You're without your parents. I'm not sure how many of you went to college, how many of you had kind of maybe strict upbringings, got to college and you went crazy, right? And even if you didn't have strict upbringings, you went to college and went crazy. I actually got a C my first semester, which, was crazy. Haha. But this idea that for the first time you're living without constraint. Dorms are places where you're allowed to explore who you are. And that's not a good thing if you're the parents, if you're the adult. You want your kid to grow and you want your kid to, but the fact of the matter is there's an anxiety about that. There's this idea of you need to be super vigilant because I've been protecting you this whole time. Yes, I gained more than I'm shifting. Okay. Ignore that. There's an anxiety. There's a fear. From both sides. And that kind of gets projected. Or, let's assume now if ghosts are real, that kind of anxiety, that kind of energy, that can help trap something there, right? That can help store that. People want to know that, or people are if you believe this energy theory, that can bring something about, right? Or that it can even release it if you're anxious. So many of these have to do with suicides. Now, here's the interesting thing, and anyone who's out there can correct me on this, or you can find the information. I'm pulling it just off the top of my head. The university that has the most suicides historically has been MIT, to the point that when my ex-wife used to work there, during midterms and finals, they would actually say, she worked, she ran the fitness center there. They would say, unless someone is in real danger of hurting themselves, do not stop them if they're breaking the rules. If they come in jeans, don't talk to them. If something's going on, don't talk to them, because those people are so high strung that they just explode, right? And so there's this idea that MIT historically has had more suicides per student than any other university in the United States, at least. And yet, there's no ghost stories about MIT. I tried. Trust me, I tried. Because I wanted one, because I was there all the time, picking her up or whatever. And so I wanted a story to follow up on. There's no ghost stories from MIT. So if this idea of suicide were really genuinely causing it, and I see Rita has posted one about suicide from Regis. I'll have to look up on that. But why is it not at MIT? Why is it some places, not the other? I guess is a story. The number of hauntings that are at a school that have to do with suicide, just from the ones I know, there's some kind of suicide or violent death is pretty high. Now, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Although, once again, I think it can work both ways. If we were to say that ghosts are real, one of the reasons why schools can be haunted, and I'm going to talk about universities for a second. I'll get to lower grades, but I'm talking mainly high schools and colleges right now. Is that some of these colleges have been open for 100 years, more than that. If you're talking kind of like the big ones, I'm not really sure. We're gonna have to do the research on when Stetson was open, but if it's 100 years, that's kind of like around where it is. There's a history there, right? So it's not as if, which is why FGCU, which is why Hodges, they don't have these stories yet, right? But if there is a tradition, right? It's the same as rubbing the bulldog at Yale before the football game. Experiencing these stories, if they're real ghosts, there's been a long time for history to imprint itself, right? If they're not, then it's because there is so much rich history there, right? It's one of those, it's haunted because it's supposed to be haunted kind of deals. This university has seen a lot of tragedy. It's seen a lot of good times. It's seen a lot of bad times. It's had its share of mishaps, and therefore it's had all these years to have stuff imprinted on it. And I think that if you combine that with students make really good audiences, that's an experience. That's why these things are happening in universities. I'm going to tell you, for those of you guys who aren't Bridgewater Triangle, raise your hand if you're not familiar with the Bridgewater Triangle. I don't see any hands up. So thank you. Natalie says Stetson was actually founded in 1883. That's why she's here, because she's the crack researcher. Stetson was founded in 1883, which would make it with like 130 something years, 131 years. Math teachers out there, anybody? Are you still here with me, Mr. Howarth? So that's actually pretty long when it comes to Florida. Now Colvin, this is where Colvin chimes in with when the University of Miami was founded. Probably my favorite non-high school haunting is Hornbein School. So if you're not familiar with the Bridgewater Triangle, this is kind of gonna be, if you are, then FGCU has removed a spirit about a boy who drowned in the lake. I'm gonna have to follow up on that, my man. There's a story, and it's originally published in that book right over there, which I can't grab from where I am right now. But the New England Ghost Files, originally published in New England Ghost Files, of the Hornbein School, which is in Rehoboth, Massachusetts. Like most of those stories were in Rehoboth, right? Or the best ones are. And the story goes that a woman was crawling up. She was walking into it. She was a teacher, and it's an old-fashioned school. So she went by it, and there was a class going on. And everyone was kind of dressed in what she described as period pieces, like old Victorian, seemed really old-fashioned outfits. One-room schoolhouse. She looked in through the windows. She saw it, and the teacher looked really pissed that she was there. And so she kind of, went back to her car, and then she decided, all right, so let me go back and apologize to the woman. And what she found was that there was no one there. It's a historical building. Class hadn't been going on there for a while. And so she had pretty much experienced like an entire ghostly class. Now, if I'm a ghost, I don't want to be in school that whole time. And more important than that, if I'm a ghost, I don't want to be a teacher in the afterlife, okay? There have been several reports of that, most of them kind of uncorroborated. We're not going to talk about that. We've discussed that kind of stuff before. But this idea that for some reason there was a time slip, I guess would be a more common way to say that. And that has made that building famous, right? Everyone and their brother who is into the paranormal has to at some point or another go to the Hornbein School. My very first investigation, which I would totally label more of a legend trip than an investigation. We went to the Hornbein School. We didn't actually physically. All right, Mr. Colvin, have a wonderful vacation. Do well. Leave your garage door open so I can get the lawnmower. But I'm glad you're going to be doing. Get some information, Charleston. I should have given you my tickets. I should have given you my business card to pass out. If you want to stop at my house, I have a whole stack of business cards you can pass out while you're in Charleston. Hashtag haunted love, my brother. Happy anniversary, I guess. This is kind of like an anniversary, so I'm not sure if that's why you guys are going. This Hornbein School people go to, we went to it, and I remember it was at that point that one of the people I was with was having the feeling of someone pulling down on them, like grabbing their legs, trying to pull them into the ground. I don't know if that's a true story. I don't know if that was something that was actually going on. It was the person I was with. I would trust them. They're a little over dramatic, but I trust that they were honest with me. I didn't experience anything there myself. Colleges are based on rituals. Legend trips are based on rituals. Let's talk about the Black Lady of Iowa City. This is actually, I think, one of the very first posts on the Tripping on Legends site was this story. What I was doing was basically going state to state, trying to find the coolest urban legend in each state. And I started this before there was Ranker and all that stuff that were doing the same kind of thing. And for some reason, I remember it had to do with Captain Kirk. I was watching Star Trek, so I was like, oh, Captain Kirk's from Iowa. I found the story in Iowa City of the Dark Lady. So if you know the story, and actually I'm going to hashtag Dark Lady on this as we speak, but of course it won't work. If I try to do this, I'm going to go completely off. But beautiful, I spelled it right. There's a statue, and it's a typical statue kind of legend, right? Haunted. They say that they see figures at the statue. It's been known to talk a lot. So Natalie and her talking statue. Here we have one in Iowa City, and it's become famous for people to go, for the college especially, to go and visit this. And they say that you are not and I hope I'm getting the college right, Iowa State. You are not completely a co-ed until you have kissed the statue, right? So that's this. You have to go. It has to be at a certain time at night. You have to go and you have to kiss the statue. But it said that if you kiss someone else in front of the statue, you will die within 6 months. There are all of these legends that are attached to what you can and cannot do to the statue. But more importantly, people follow them. It is part of the culture of this college to embrace that. It's part of the culture of the college to trip this ghostly legend, to go talk to the statue. I remember there was one thing about it where if you are, I believe it's this way and not the woman, but if the man wants to marry one of the students there, he has to go and ask the statue. Like Robert's rules, you have to go and ask the statue if you're allowed to marry. You don't have to wait for an answer. I guess if something bad happened, you know that you're not supposed to. There's your hashtag haunted love. If something bad happens, you know you weren't meant to marry the person. But that's kind of like one of the rituals. If two people who are going to the university fall in love and one wants to marry the guy is supposed to go to the statue and he's supposed to ask the statue for permission, and he's going to get a response. One of the other things is that you're supposed to be able to go there at midnight, close your eyes, and the statue will whisper in your ear the name of the person that you're going to marry. Now, I know that takes a lot of the fun out of love, but wouldn't you love to know that you have a statue's blessing, that like it has been ordained by the spiritual world that you are to marry someone? What I want to do right now is I want to open it up to you guys to respond. We're getting some pretty good responses. What are some other college or school hauntings that you know about? I was always saddened that Trinity, go Pioneers, never really had anything, never really had any ghosts. Now, I don't know if that's just because it was a Catholic high school, and so they suppressed some of that, or whether, I mean, I never even had anything really unusual happen there, but I know other high schools that are. I'm going to tell you another story about a haunted school, and hope you guys respond with other ones that you know. And you can write kind of just like little details about them. This is the story of a lovely lady. No, this is the story of a hit song, I guess. For those of you guys who are old enough or of that generation, the band Pearl Jam did a song called Journey. And if you don't know the song, it's a song about a boy who commits suicide in his classroom. And it's kind of Pearl Jam's interpretation of why they think Jeremy committed suicide. It's a true story. It happened at Richardson High School in Texas. Now, I'm not sure if Richardson is its own town, like a suburb of Dallas, or whether it's in Dallas, but it is a real story. It happened at Richardson High School. My best friend, now I'm sorry for anyone out there who thinks they're my best friend, but my original partner in all of this, Jenna, went to that high school. She knew Jeremy, right? Her best friend was really good friends and maybe even dated. See, I love this because this becomes urban legend-y, right? Because it's a friend of a friend. The person who is Jeremy's best friend. And so the story goes that he was in in-school suspension. He came back. He was supposed to get some material, drop off some material back to his English classroom. One of the students said, like, what's going on, Jeremy? And he said something to the effect of, it's a good day, took out a gun and committed suicide. I talk about in Haunted Objects the story of the boy who had a suicide pact with Jeremy. And so they were both supposed to commit suicide. The kid backed down. He was freaked out. And I talk about how there were all these posters around the room of their favorite bands. And these posters became kind of the subject, or the focus at least, of this haunting, where the pins would fly out in the middle of the night and hit him in the head while he was trying to sleep. So they would fly down, right, out and down, and hit him in the head. And several times he would see the poster off the wall and hovering. He would always, all the time, I didn't really get into this too much in Haunted Objects, but he would say, like, why haven't you done it? Why haven't you done it? You promised you'd do it. He'd hear these whispers all the time in his room. Until, one night he found, one day he came home and the poster was ripped. And he took it down and he threw it away and he was freaked out. And then the next day he came and the poster was back up and it was perfectly fine. So it was kind of freaky. I don't really get into it too much in that book because it didn't really call for it. But Richardson High School, once again, is one of those places that is said to be extremely haunted. So I got this from Jenna. I got this from her friend Amy, who conveyed that other story to me, that the room where Jeremy committed suicide, and once again, it could be different now. This is going on 25. Just had my 25-year reunion. This is 20-year reunion. This is that room has been closed off, or at that time was closed off, especially because now that the song was popular and it made it popular. And so the room was closed off, and they would all the time, and they would store stuff there. It became like a big storage closet, and they would hear things being thrown around that storage closet. There was one night, I think I'm getting this story correct, where Jenna, who was in the drama program, they went by that room like late at night, and like a ball rolled out of it. But if you ask people who go to Richardson High School, they will tell you that no one ever goes in that room. That room's extremely haunted. They sometimes in the classrooms around it, they'll hear pounding, they'll hear phantom gunshots. I said it right. I totally said it right now. Did you hear that? Once again, it's this idea of capturing their history. Why does tragedy that happens in one building, a suicide or a death, not generate a haunting, but in a school it does? We talked a little bit about that idea of anxiety or fear, but how about that other part of it? I wish I could remember the name of it. I had this job for a little bit. I quit my job. I got because I got an offer for this other job that was paying a ridiculous amount of money. And what I didn't fully understand at that time is I would be working with a room full of ESE students, which I was not trained for. I mean, I had only been a teacher at that point for, I think, 2 years, but they absolutely loved me. They loved my ideas. They threw all this money at me. I left my job. I went to go to that one. I lasted 2 days in the actual classroom. Did great the 2 weeks leading up to it. Did great in preschool. 2 days I lasted, not because the kids were necessarily bad, not because the situation was bad, not because they were necessarily ESE. What I learned about myself was that I needed that rush of the bell ringing, kids leaving, new kids coming in. It rejuvenates. Anyone who's a teacher, maybe they feel that. Like if a class is going really badly, in 20 minutes that class is going to be over and new kids are going to come in, right? And they bring their energy with them. Or there's a certain level of anxiety about a class. There's a lot of emotion that goes with just in and out and in and out. And maybe this is one of the reasons why there's not as many grammar school or elementary school hauntings, is that they don't have that in and out of students. But I think that there's a lot of energy that's generated, and it's not always negative, in a school, right? You have all these people, you have all of these, we in the school, Paul Lawrence Dunbar, we have about 1,000 kids, right? Now I've moved on, but I'm just going to use them as an example. That's 1,000 spirits. That's 1,000. Think of the Matrix. That's 1,000 batteries charging things up. It makes sense that if there is such a thing as ghosts, I always have to say that, they have a constantly recharging source of power to get energy from, right? They have a flow of electricity going in and out of that place at all times for them to rejuvenate with. Now, a lot of these hauntings don't happen during the day, right? But that energy is there. That energy can be potentially trapped there and be used. It creates an environment that seems to be conducive to this kind of thing. So, to recap, history, anxiety, other positive emotions, the need to connect. And I really want to stress that this need to connect, this need to belong to something, this need to have common ground is what I feel the primary reason for so many haunted schools. That idea to have something that they call their own. But if you take all those things and combine them, you have the perfect setup for the scientific or metaphysical reasoning for a ghost to be there. You have all the reasons for urban legends or folklore to be developed. You have an ongoing influx and outflux of people who are going to spread it. You have rumor mills that are just waiting for something, some tidbit to pass on to the next person. These are the perfect breeding grounds for urban legends. I'm not sure if anyone's ever done a haunted school book just talking about haunted schools, but it's out there. That idea is out there. And I will say that over the now 20 years of doing this, my most popular pages are the ones that have to do with haunted schools. Like I used to have a whole school section at Mass Crossroads, just haunted schools. And that was probably, other than the Red-Headed Hitchhiker, and then eventually Puck Wedgies, the most hit part of that site. People wanted to know whether their school was haunted. They wanted to share their stories. I got so much feedback on haunted colleges, and they wanted to just know about these haunted schools. So it's a really great coming together place, much like it is to be a school.